On a rainy night, a woman named Mira heard a faint cry from outside her wooden house at the edge of the forest. When she opened the door, she saw a small black kitten with fine specks on its fur, shivering under the heavy rain. Without hesitation, she wrapped the tiny creature in an old blanket and brought it inside. She named it Koro. Mira didn't know that by saving that kitten, she had invited a miracle, one that would soon change her destiny forever. That night was silent. The only sound was the heavy rain pounding on the wooden roof of the house by the forest. Mira was lighting the fire in her hearth when she heard a faint sound, like a baby crying, from outside. She pulled back the curtain and saw something small moving under the flash of lightning. A mix of curiosity and pity stirred in her chest. With an umbrella and a lantern, she stepped out, braving the storm. Under a large tree, a small black kitten was shivering, its fur soaked, its eyes sharp yet gentle. Mira knelt, speaking softly, afraid to scare the little creature. The kitten mewed faintly, then collapsed into her hands. She quickly wrapped it in the old blanket she had brought. Without hesitation, she ran back home, shielding the tiny body from the rain. Inside, she lit the fireplace and gently dried its fur. The kitten looked strange. Faint spots covered its body, visible only in the firelight. Mira smiled and said, "You're so small, but your eyes... it's like you understand." The kitten gazed at her for a moment, then fell asleep in her lap. Mira watched it with tenderness, unaware that their fates had just become entwined. The next morning, birdsong and forest dew woke Mira. She found the kitten sleeping near the hearth, its small belly rising gently. Softly she said, "From now on, I'll call you Koro." The kitten yawned and came closer, as if it understood. Mira's heart warmed. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. She prepared warm milk, but Koro refused, preferring leftover meat instead. Mira frowned but let it be, thinking it must be very hungry. Each day, Koro grew quickly, too quickly for an ordinary cat. Its black fur gleamed more each day, and its faint spots became clearer. At night, its eyes glowed in the dark, like two living stars. Mira began to tell Koro stories about her lonely past, about her husband who vanished in the forest, and her dream of having a true companion. Koro listened, as if understanding every word. Sometimes it would press its head gently against her chest, and in that quiet, a bond deeper than love for an animal began to form. Weeks passed, and Koro grew with astonishing speed. Mira realized its body was now as large as a grown dog. What startled her more, its claws and fangs were unnaturally sharp. Sometimes Koro would stare out the window as if hearing something deep in the woods. And every full moon, its eyes glowed with a strange intensity. One night, Mira heard a distant roar. Koro suddenly stood tall, its fur bristling, its breath heavy. It stepped toward the door, growling lowly. Mira whispered, "What is it, Koro?" But Koro only looked at her as if saying, "Don't go out tonight." The next morning, Mira found large footprints in the wet earth near her house. They weren't human, but not quite feline either. Fear crept into her heart, but love overpowered it. She promised herself she would care for Koro, no matter what. That was when wonder and danger began to intertwine in her life. The air was damp that morning, mist clinging to the trees. Mira was hanging laundry when Koro suddenly perked up. It stared into the forest, ears twitching, letting out a soft hiss. Birds nearby took flight, panicking for no visible reason. A chill ran through Mira, not from the air, but from within. Later that day, they found a deer's carcass by the riverbank. Its body was cleanly torn, not like any predator's bite. Koro approached, sniffing the blood, then growled deeply. The fur along its neck rose. It recognized another hunter's scent. Mira gently pulled it back, staring at the forest that now felt full of secrets. That night, rain fell again. Koro paced restlessly, its eyes flicking toward the window, then back at Mira, as if wanting to protect her. She hugged it and whispered, "You're safe here, Koro." But deep in its eyes, something ancient stirred, a primal instinct that no house cat should possess. Days later, Mira found Koro limping home, blood dripping from its shoulder. It made no sound, just stared at her silently. Panicked, she fetched warm water and clean cloth. "Who did this to you, Koro?" she asked, trembling. Koro lowered its head, letting her tend the wound gently. When she cleaned it, she noticed its skin, thick and tough, not like a cat's, more like that of a wild beast. But she refused to let fear take over. "Whatever you are, you're still my child," she whispered. Koro stared at her, then licked her hand softly. That night, he lay in front of the door, guarding it without sleep. His golden eyes gleamed like embers, and Mira, half asleep, heard distant roars from the forest. But Koro didn't move, only hissed softly, warning something unseen. For the first time, Mira felt her home was truly being protected. One evening, 2 hunters from the village came to Mira's house. They carried weapons and dogs, their faces wary. "We heard there's a large beast around here," one said. Mira kept calm, hiding Koro in the kitchen. "There's nothing here, only me and my cat," she replied gently. But the dog began barking fiercely toward the kitchen. Koro leapt out, standing tall, fur raised, eyes blazing. The dog whimpered and backed away in fear. The hunters stared, pale-faced, at the cat, nearly up to a man's knee. "He's not an ordinary cat," one whispered. Mira quickly soothed Koro and shut the door tight. Her heart pounded, half in fear, half in awe. Koro lowered his head, as if ashamed for scaring them. Mira gave a faint smile. "You're special, Koro." But the world wouldn't understand. From that day on, she rarely opened her door to strangers again. Thick fog covered the forest and fields that night. Mira sat on the porch, staring at the invisible sky. Koro lay beside her, alert, watching the darkness. Suddenly, 2 red lights glowed between the trees. Koro hissed, body tense like a drawn bow. Mira held his shoulder. "Easy, dear. What is that?" But Koro leapt into the fog, silent and swift. There was the sound of rustling branches, then a short, fierce roar. Mira held her breath, heart pounding. When Koro returned, his fur was streaked with blood, but his eyes were calm. He dropped something at Mira's feet, the severed head of a giant snake. She stared, trembling with shock and awe. Koro looked at her as if to say, "I protect this house." Tears filled Mira's eyes as she hugged him. "Thank you, Koro. Even if I don't know what you really are." Days passed, and Mira noticed something strange. The faint spots on Koro's body slowly disappeared, replaced by a deep, perfect black that gleamed like velvet in sunlight. He had grown tall. His shoulders reached the height of a table, his steps silent yet powerful, but in his eyes remained the same gentleness as before. Mira tried to make sense of the feeling inside her. She realized Koro was no longer a kitten, but her love was too strong to fear him. Sometimes she laughed softly. "Maybe you're a forest spirit in disguise." Koro only purred, closing his eyes in her lap. Villagers began to whisper. They claimed to see a large shadow near Mira's house. Some said it was a guardian spirit, others, a wild beast. But Mira didn't care, as long as Koro was with her. She knew that behind every terrifying roar was a love that protected her, and for Mira, that was more real than any human fear. That night, the full moon shone bright, lighting the entire yard. Koro sat in the moonlight, his eyes glowing silver. Mira watched from the window, mesmerized. Every movement was graceful, wild, yet sacred, as if she were witnessing a god of the forest. When she stepped outside, Koro approached softly. He lowered his head and touched her forehead with his muzzle. At that moment, a gentle wind swept through, rustling the leaves. Her heart trembled. A silent communication passed between them, and in that instant, Mira knew Their connection was no accident. That night, she dreamed. In her dream, Koro stood atop the forest hill. His black fur shimmered, his eyes shining like twin stars. From the shadows, a panther emerged, and Koro joined it. When she awoke, her heart was racing. She began to understand her kitten might not belong to the human world. One morning, a loud crash echoed behind the house. Mira ran outside to find the wooden fence broken, claw marks all over it. Koro stood nearby, his body enormous, almost as tall as Mira herself. His eyes radiated strength, yet carried a strange calm. He looked at her as if to say, "Now you know." Mira stood frozen, tears filling her eyes. "You're not a cat. You're a panther," she whispered. Koro lowered his head, pressing it against her chest. He purred softly, not as an animal, but as a companion. Mira held him close, torn between fear and love. That day the sky grew heavy, and the forest rumbled with distant sounds. But to Mira, the world seemed to stop. She didn't see a monster, only a soul that had grown beside hers. "Whatever you are, Koro," she said, voice trembling. "As long as I live, you are my family." The night wind carried the scent of rain and the sound of branches snapping from the forest. Mira awoke, hearing heavy footsteps approaching from outside. She looked toward the window, but all she could see was darkness and thick fog. Koro was already standing before the door, growling lowly, his eyes glowing. Moments later, a loud roar echoed through the night, shaking the glass panes. Mira clenched her hands tightly, holding her breath. Outside, something ran away, its footsteps heavy and uneven. Koro gave chase briefly, then returned, his claws stained with blood. Mira knelt beside him, tears in her eyes. "You protected me, didn't you?" she whispered gratefully. She cleaned his claws with a warm cloth while Koro sat calmly and silent. In his eyes, Mira saw something deep, pure loyalty. That quiet night, woman and beast understood each other without words. Rain began to fall softly, washing away the scent of blood and tension. And in every drop, there was a silent promise between two different souls. The next morning, Mira went out to inspect the surroundings. She found large footprints, far wider than a human hand. They led toward the river, where roars were often heard at night. Mira knelt and touched the damp earth carefully. "Whoever came last night won't be coming back," she murmured. Koro followed behind her, his steps light but commanding. He walked beside Mira like a shadow guardian. From time to time, he looked to the sky, as if reading the direction of danger. Mira smiled faintly, realizing how large he had grown. Yet in her heart, Koro was still the little kitten she had once found. When they reached the riverbank, the water was tinged with pale red. Blood. Koro stepped closer, sniffing the air with his sharp nose. Suddenly, he roared, a powerful sound that sent birds scattering. Mira flinched, frightened, but then realized it wasn't a roar of threat. It was a warning to anyone who dared harm their home. Rumors of a large black creature began spreading through the village. People said Mira kept a forest spirit, a siluman. Children were forbidden to take the path leading to her house. But Mira didn't care. Her heart belonged only to Koro. She knew that true love needed no human approval. One morning, the village chief came to see her, his face stern. "You must hand over that animal, Mira." "It's dangerous." The woman stood calmly, her gaze soft but piercing. "Koro isn't dangerous. He only protects me." But the man merely shook his head and left with a veiled threat. Koro, as if understanding, stood beside Mira, watching them go. Mira stroked his head, feeling the warmth of his sleek black fur. "The world doesn't always understand what is beautiful," she whispered. Koro purred softly, easing her heart. And in the silence that followed, they both prepared themselves for the coming storm. That night, the smell of smoke crept into the house. Mira ran outside and saw flames spreading through the bushes near the back fence. No arsonist was in sight, but human footprints marked the ground. "Koro!" she cried in panic, and instantly a dark shadow shot out from within. In a heartbeat, the great beast lunged through the flames with fearless courage. Koro clawed at the burning branches, diverting the fire away from the house. Thick smoke made Mira cough violently, but she kept throwing water on the flames. The wind fanned the fire, making it dance wildly as if it wanted to devour them. But Koro stood firm, his body between Mira and the inferno. His eyes blazed red, like twin embers defying the world. After hours of struggle, the fire finally died down. Their home was saved. But Koro's fur was scorched, his skin blistered along his right side. Mira ran to him and hugged him, tears streaming silently. "Why do you always protect me?" she whispered painfully. Koro only bowed his head, pressing it gently against her chest. For days, Mira tended to Koro's burns with utmost care. She treated him with herbal poultices made from leaves and honey. Koro never complained. He simply watched her with calm, gentle eyes. Those eyes, once feared by others, were now full of love in her view. Mira felt that in his gaze lay something more than mere animal instinct. Every night she spoke to him, like to an old friend. Sometimes she told stories of her childhood in the city, of loss and longing, and Koro always listened, never turning away. It was as if each of Mira's memories was etched into his silent soul. They became two beings bound by loneliness and affection. One night, beneath a half moon, Koro licked her hand softly. Mira heard a whisper carried by the wind, the voice of the forest spirits. "Mira, he is not a beast. He is a guardian." Mira looked to the sky and prayed in her heart. "If that's true, then let me be under his protection until the end." Seasons changed. Leaves fell like golden rain across the yard. Koro had grown to full strength, a majestic adult panther. His body was powerful, his steps silent, yet his eyes warm. Each morning, he sat near the well while Mira hung laundry. Villagers passing by kept their heads down, saying nothing. But to Mira, her days were peaceful. She began writing notes about her life with Koro. She titled it "The Black Heart of the Forest." She wrote of love, loyalty, and the courage of a wild creature. Every sentence was a prayer for them both. One afternoon, a lost child wandered near her house. It was Koro who found him behind the bushes, crying in fear. Gently, he lifted the boy with his muzzle and carried him home safely. Mira smiled through tears. "You're my hero, Koro." And for the first time, the villagers saw the kindness behind the beast's form. But that peace didn't last. A group of village hunters came, armed with rifles and dogs. They claimed a large animal had killed livestock the night before. Mira knew it wasn't Koro. He had been with her all night. But they wouldn't listen. To them, the great black beast was a threat. Koro stood at the front of the house, eyes gleaming with vigilance. The dogs barked madly but refused to go near him. One hunter fired a warning shot into the air. The noise made Koro roar, not in rage but in defense. The sound was so powerful that everyone stepped back in fear. Mira stood before Koro, spreading her arms. "Stop! He won't hurt anyone," she shouted. But the lead hunter shook his head coldly. "If he's not a monster, prove it. Send him away." Mira lowered her head, her heart breaking between love and human fear. That night, Mira couldn't sleep. She sat beside Koro, who was resting by the fireplace. The firelight flickered across his glossy black fur. Mira stroked his head, tears dripping onto the wooden floor. "I can't let them hurt you, Koro," she whispered. She thought of setting him free into the forest, a place where creatures like him could live without fear of men. But every time she imagined life without Koro, her chest tightened. "You're my only family," she said, voice trembling. Koro opened his eyes, looking at her calmly, as if understanding everything. When morning came, mist fell softly like a curtain of farewell. Mira stood at the edge of the forest, Koro beside her. She knelt and wrapped her arms around his massive neck. If one day I'm gone, protect this home, she whispered. Koro stared at her for a long time, then stepped slowly into the woods. The days that followed felt empty for Mira. The wooden house was silent, without the sound of Koro's steps. Nights were cold, filled only with distant echoes of roaring. Sometimes she saw a dark silhouette by the forest's edge, watching her house. She knew Koro was still there, guarding her from afar. One rainy evening, she heard a sound at the door. When she opened it, a fresh deer carcass lay outside, a gift from the forest. She smiled softly, tears welling in her eyes. "You're still watching over me, aren't you, Koro?" she whispered. From then on, she placed a bowl of water and food on the porch every night. It was always empty by morning, as if an unseen guardian came and went quietly. And though she no longer saw him up close, Mira knew she was never truly alone. Their love needed no distance to survive. One night, a violent storm struck, shaking the entire valley. Trees fell, the roof trembled, and lightning split the sky. Mira lit a candle and prayed for her home to withstand the storm. Then suddenly, a roar thundered outside, one she knew too well. "Koro," she breathed, looking out the window. Through the heavy rain, a massive shadow raced toward the house. Koro, drenched and wounded, burst through the door, knocking it down. He shielded Mira from a falling tree branch that would have crushed her. She screamed and clung to him as the storm raged. They fell to the floor together, but neither let go. When the storm finally subsided, they lay exhausted. Mira smiled against Koro's chest, hearing his heavy heartbeat. "You came back to me," she whispered, eyes closing softly. Koro purred lowly, staring at the fire glowing in the hearth. That night, for the first time in a long while, the house felt alive again. News of the pet black panther spread quickly to the neighboring village. Some swore they had seen a large shadow at the edge of the fields. A few who lost their livestock accused Mira of secretly keeping the beast. Fear turned into blind hatred. Mira's name was now whispered with suspicion among the villagers. But Mira did not waver. She knew who Koro truly was. She knew the hands that guarded her would never harm a human without reason. Every night she wrote in her notebook, "When humans fear something, they forget to understand." That sentence became her prayer amid the storm of prejudice. Koro, who always heard voices from afar, appeared less and less during the day. He came only when night fell, sitting silently on the porch like a living shadow. Mira would always look deep into his eyes and whisper, "I believe in you." And somewhere beyond the darkness of the forest, it felt as if another world blessed their love. A gentle rain fell, washing away the wounds in both their hearts. One day, 3 strange men arrived with a truck and long rifles. They wore uniforms and carried papers signed by the village chief. "We'll capture the beast, dead or alive," said one coldly. Mira said nothing, clutching the pendant around her neck. She knew the real storm had just begun. That night, she wrote a letter. If anything happened to her, it was to be found on the table. It said only, "He's not a monster. He's my friend. Please protect him outside." Koro ran between the trees, watching from afar. He knew those men came with evil intent. At midnight, gunshots echoed from the forest. Birds scattered, the air reeked of gunpowder. Mira stood on her porch, trembling with tears and fear. "Please, don't hurt him," she whispered to the dark sky. And through the sound of the wind, a long, haunting roar answered her, painful and enraged. That morning, the forest felt strangely silent. No birds sang. Mira walked slowly toward the place where the shots had come from. On the damp ground, she found dark bloodstains and soft tufts of Koro's fur. Her throat tightened. Her breath grew heavy. "No, Koro," she whispered, falling to her knees. She followed the trail of blood to the riverbank. There, the water ran red with leaves and broken branches. but no body, only signs of a fierce struggle. Human footprints turned back in panic. Mira knew Koro was still alive, but gravely wounded. That night, she lit an oil lamp on the porch and waited without sleep. Rain fell. Lightning split the sky. Just before dawn, heavy footsteps came from the forest. Koro emerged, bloody, battered, but his eyes still burning. Mira screamed and ran to him, hugging him tightly, uncaring of the blood that stained her clothes. Koro's body was covered in gashes. A bullet lodged in his shoulder. Mira cried as she tried to remove it with a small knife and warm water. Her trembling hands could barely hold steady as blood kept flowing. But Koro stayed silent, his eyes filled with trust. "You're strong, Koro. Stay with me," she wept. All night she worked, refusing to rest. By dawn, Koro was weak, but alive. Mira kissed his forehead and whispered, "We've come too far to give up now?" She knew the humans wouldn't stop, but neither would she. Love had sparked a courage that could not be extinguished. Outside, morning mist cloaked the forest like a secret veil. An eagle cried above the house. Koro looked up, sensing the call of the wild. But his gaze returned to Mira, gentle and calm. He chose to stay, though the world demanded otherwise. Days passed, and Koro's wounds began to heal. But Mira rarely went to the village anymore, afraid of the villagers' eyes. She survived only on her garden and the small stream behind the house. One morning, she found an envelope on her doorstep. Inside was a single sentence, "We will return." Her heart tightened, but she stayed calm. She knew this war couldn't be won by violence. That night, she wrote again in her notebook, "If love is a sin, then let me sin forever for his sake." Her handwriting trembled, ink blurred by tears. Koro sat quietly in the corner, watching her. He seemed to know something heavy was coming. Sometimes he looked out the window, listening to distant footsteps. Mira approached and whispered, "Whatever happens, don't leave me." And in that silent night, even the stars seemed to tremble above them. The dreaded night finally came. 5 men arrived, carrying torches and guns, shouting in the heavy rain. "Give us the beast!" they cried. Mira stood at her doorway, holding an oil lamp with shaking hands. "No, he's not a beast. He's my family." One hunter fired into the air, shattering the window. Koro leapt out of the darkness, his roar shaking the ground. Bullets flew wildly. Only one found its mark. In an instant, 2 hunters fell in terror. The rest fled into the woods. Koro stood tall in the rain, shielding Mira with his entire being. Mira rushed to him, pressing against the wound in his belly. "Enough, my love. No more," she whispered, hugging his great neck. Koro lowered his head, the light in his eyes fading slowly. But before he collapsed, he looked at Mira one last time, softly, as if to say, "I'm here." And that night, even the forest wept with her. For an entire week, Koro did not wake. Mira cared for him without rest, barely eating, never sleeping. Her body weakened, but her eyes never stopped praying. Every night she whispered, "Wake up, Koro. I need you." And on the 7th day, the great creature finally opened his eyes. He tried to stand, his legs trembling. Mira caught him with all her strength. "You came back to me," she cried, tears of relief streaming down. Koro licked her face gently as if to wipe away every tear. They sat in silence, the rain outside marking the moment of their small miracle. But Mira knew danger was not gone. The hunters would return, this time with more men. She began thinking of escape to somewhere far from the village. Yet when she looked at the weakened Koro, her heart hesitated. "Leaving this house means leaving our memories," she whispered. A gray dawn greeted their departure. Mira carried a small backpack of food and her notebook. Koro walked slowly behind her, weak but steadfast. They followed the narrow path north, where the forest grew denser, quieter. Each step felt like saying farewell to their past. Birds watched from the branches as they passed. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and freedom. Mira looked at the dull sky and smiled softly. "It's all right, Koro. As long as we're together, this is home." Koro rumbled low, eyes filled with peace. But as night fell, they heard the distant sound of engines. A familiar sound. The hunters were still pursuing them. Mira pulled Koro into a small cave near the cliffs. She lit a small fire and stared into its glow, exhausted. "Maybe we were never meant to belong to this world," she whispered. Rain poured all night, washing away their tracks. Koro lay in the corner of the cave, damp fur rising and falling heavily. Mira stroked his neck and leaned her head on his shoulder. "The world may reject you," she whispered, "but I never will." Her eyes watched the small fire dance, reflecting both their faces. Outside, thunder rumbled again and again. At times, Koro looked toward the cave's mouth, alert, his wild instincts still sharp, yet softened by love. Mira clutched the pendant at her neck and prayed softly, "If one of us must go first, let it be me." When dawn came, fog wrapped the forest in silence. Koro stood slowly, his body still weak. He licked Mira's forehead gently, then stepped outside. Mira followed, afraid, but stopped halfway. She knew. Koro was walking toward something only nature could understand. 3 days later, Mira returned home alone. But as she opened the door, a great shadow moved inside. Koro was already there, carrying branches and wildflowers in his mouth. He looked at her like a child returning from play. Mira smiled wide, tears streaming freely. The house was scarred, broken boards, bullet holes, burned walls. But to them, it was still the most beautiful place in the world. Mira sat on the porch, leaning against Koro's great shoulder. "I don't want to leave again," she whispered. "Let the world forget us." Koro gazed at the forest, his eyes calm as a starless night. The sky was cloudy yet peaceful. Birds sang again among the branches. The forest, as if knowing their story, whispered softly through the wind. And for the first time, Mira felt the world had stopped fighting. She only wished to live with her black-hearted guardian until time itself ceased. Time passed unnoticed. Seasons turned and years slipped away. Mira aged slowly. Her hair turned white, her steps grew heavy. Yet every morning, Koro still sat on the porch, waiting for her first smile. They lived simply, surrounded by silence and falling leaves. There was no longer an outside world, only the two of them, and time itself. The house was now covered in moss, wildflowers climbing its walls. Mira often sat in her wooden chair, telling stories from her youth. Koro listened, sometimes purring softly at her feet. Each story ended with a small laugh and a long sigh. "Funny, isn't it?" Mira said one afternoon, "that you, who never age, now take care of me." Koro gazed at her, golden eyes glimmering with love. He knew that time was slowly stealing the one he loved. Each night, he slept closer, his great body keeping her warm. In silence, nature witnessed a love that needed no words, only gentle breaths, a steady heartbeat, and the glow of a single oil lamp. One morning, the wind carried a strange scent, cold and heavy. Mira woke later than usual, her eyes tired and soft. She looked at Koro sitting in the corner, his eyes full of worry. "It's all right, my dear," Mira whispered. "Perhaps my body just wants to rest." But deep inside she knew her time was near. In the following days, she grew quieter, gazing at the forest through the window. Her voice became tender, like someone saying farewell. "If one morning I don't wake up, don't cry, Koro." Koro lowered his head, his growl small, almost like a kitten's once again. He understood that language, even if he couldn't grasp the words. Night fell quickly, and rain came softly. Mira wrote her final note in her journal. True love never chooses form. It only knows devotion. After writing it, she looked at the fire and smiled. Koro came close, lying at her feet, standing guard in silence. The sun rose behind the fog, but the house remained silent. Koro opened his eyes slowly, hearing the first bird song. He looked toward Mira, still sitting in her wooden chair, but she no longer moved. Her eyes were closed in peace, her hand still holding a pen upon her lap. The paper on the table fluttered in the wind, carrying a single word: Koro. The great beast approached, pressing his nose to her cold hand. He growled softly, then let out a small roar, as if calling to a soul already gone. No answer came. Only the wind replied, tender and slow. Koro bowed his head, then lay beside her, gazing at her face for a long time. Tears fell, something no wild creature had ever done. The forest fell silent. The birds stopped singing. Even the wind seemed afraid to disturb that sacred moment. Koro licked Mira's cheek gently, as though trying to wake her. But time had already taken what he loved most. A long, mournful roar echoed through the mountain, the grief of a guardian. From that day on, the house by the forest was utterly silent. Koro never left the porch. He sat beside the wooden chair, unmoving. Rain fell, winds came, yet he stayed, guarding what was no longer there. Each dusk, he looked toward the horizon, waiting for what could never return, as if hoping Mira would appear again, with her gentle smile. Seasons changed. Fallen leaves blanketed the yard. Wild animals sometimes approached, but left quickly, respecting the quiet. Even the wolves in the distance ceased their howls when Koro roared. It was not a roar of rage, but a prayer of deep sorrow. The entire forest seemed to mourn with him. One night, the full moon shone brightly above the cottage. Koro rose slowly, looking up at the sky, his eyes soft, almost human. He walked toward the small grave behind the house, where Mira was buried. Gently, he laid a wild flower upon the soil. Then he lay beside it, silent, gazing at the last star of the night. Years passed, and the village changed, yet no one dared to approach the old house by the forest. People said that every night a long howl echoed from there, not of anger, but of longing that never faded. Children grew up with tales of the Panther, guardian of the holy woman. Some wanderers swore they saw a great shadow at dusk, a black panther sitting beside an old grave, perfectly still. Its golden eyes were not frightening, only filled with sorrow. When approached, the creature vanished like mist, yet the scent of wildflowers lingered on the damp earth. One day a painter from the city came searching for the legend. He found the old cottage, cracked and overgrown with moss. Inside, he discovered a worn journal upon the table. The final page bore faint ink. He came to me as a small kitten, and stayed forever in my heart. That night, the painter drew what he had seen: a great black panther standing under moonlight, gazing at the stars. Beside it, a faint silhouette of an old woman smiled softly. The painting became famous, titled "The Eternal Guardian." But the painter knew what he had truly seen: genuine love. Every line of his brush carried meaning, every color held silence. People who saw it often wept without knowing why. They felt something beyond time and form, a love between human and wild, pure and unconditional. And in that forest, their story still breathed through the wind. Koro might no longer exist in body, but on certain nights beneath the full moon, the fortunate might glimpse two shadows beneath the great tree, one human, one beast, looking to the sky together in eternal peace. At the place where Mira was buried, a great banyan tree grew. Its roots spread deep and strong, its leaves shading the entire yard. Birds perched upon its highest branches as if standing guard. Each morning, soft mist wrapped the tree like an embrace, and if one listened closely, a calm, heavy breath could be heard. Villagers now called it the Guardian Banyan. They believed Mira and Koro's spirits dwelled there, protecting the forest from greed. No one dared cut trees or hunt anymore. The forest became sacred to all who came with pure hearts. Some even claimed to feel a gentle hand touch their shoulder. Time went on, but the tale never faded. Visitors came to lay flowers among the roots. Sometimes, a leaf would fall right before them, though no wind blew. They said it was a greeting from two old friends who never truly left, only became part of nature itself. Mira's journal was eventually found by a small child. He read it beneath the banyan tree and cried, not knowing why. On the last page was a letter without an address. To whoever reads this, love something without fearing its difference. Those words lit a small fire in his heart. The child grew up to be a writer, telling stories of forests and friendship. He spread the tale of Mira and Koro across the land. His book made many stop hunting and start protecting. He always ended interviews by saying, "Their love changed the world," and each time he said it, a soft wind blew from the north. Sometimes, in dreams, he saw a small spotted kitten. It sniffed his hand, then ran toward the moonlight. In that dream, an old woman smiled from the porch. Together, they whispered gently, "Thank you." Then all faded into golden light. Decades later, the forest where they once lived became a protected reserve. The government named it the Mira Koro Sanctuary. No hunting, no logging. Only the pure sound of nature remained. The forest rangers swore to guard it with their hearts. They believed the forest was alive, with spirit and feeling. Many visitors claimed to hear soft voices among the trees, sometimes like the laughter of a woman, sometimes like the deep purr of a great beast. The sounds were never frightening, only soothing, as if two ancient souls walked together, guarding the place. At the center of the sanctuary, beneath the great banyan, stood a stone statue, a woman kneeling, stroking the head of a black panther. Beneath it were carved the words, "Love does not choose form, only devotion." The statue remained spotless, though no one ever cleaned it. The rain and wind seemed to protect that eternal legacy. Decades later, the forest where they once lived became a protected reserve. The government named it the Mira Koro Sanctuary. No hunting, no logging. Only the pure sound of nature remained. The forest rangers swore to guard it with their hearts. They believed the forest was alive, with spirit and feeling. Many visitors claimed to hear soft voices among the trees, sometimes like the laughter of a woman, sometimes like the deep purr of a great beast. The sounds were never frightening, only soothing, as if two ancient souls walked together, guarding the place. At the center of the sanctuary, beneath the great banyan, stood a stone statue, a woman kneeling, stroking the head of a black panther. Beneath it were carved the words, "Love does not choose form, only devotion." The statue remained spotless, though no one ever cleaned it. The rain and wind seemed to protect that eternal legacy.